Today's episode is with an incredible woman named Morag, who actually was pregnant during the filming of this video, but now when it's come out, her COVID baby has been born. It's crazy that she called her COVID baby because he was conceived during COVID, and now she's given birth to him, and the pandemic is still going on. Holy shit, this is a long pandemic. But Morag is an incredible person who is currently writing a memoir all about postpartum depression and rage and her experience with it, hoping to normalize it with other women out there who are going through similar things. I was able to meet Morag through Dana Smith, who I met through Pick My Brain. And Pick My Brain is the sponsor of Human to Humans episode today. Pick My Brain is a profile where you can go and you can fill out a bunch of different information about yourself, and people can book you for lots of different services or just a free call. And it's an amazing way if someone's like, hey, I really want to pick your brain, but you don't want to go through all the formalities and having to message with them and figure out a time, or you want to make sure you're respecting your own time and your own boundaries. Pick My Brain is a perfect place to do that. When you start your own profile, you can decide when you want to be booked and what you can be booked for, and you also don't need to give out your knowledge for free. So start your own free profile today at pickmybrain.world. And something that I wanted to mention that goes along with this episode is normalizing experiences that mothers have. And there are a ton of mothers who are out there on Pick My Brain who want to give you support and just normalize your experience, have a conversation with you about it. So if you're someone who wants to connect with a mother or a writer or a podcaster, anything you can really think of, there's a person who does it on Pick My Brain. So just go to pickmybrain.world and click Meet the Brains, and you can browse through all these incredible people who want to engage with you in really cool and different ways. So thank you so much to our sponsor today, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Morag. It was one of the best. So welcome to Human. I'm so excited to have you here, Morag. I can't wait to dive into your memoir that you're currently working on, and that's how we have crossed paths through Dana's writing club. And I love chatting every week and hearing how things are going with you. And I wanted to kind of start off with what inspired you to write your memoir about postpartum depression and your personal experience.
Oh gosh, how long do we have? I've always been a storyteller since I was a little kid. I started writing my own stories basically as soon as I learned how to write and read. And I've always found it just a really powerful way of connecting with people. And so I've always kind of had in the back of my mind that I was going to write a book about something, and I've sort of dipped a toe in here and there and sort of wondered what it was I had to say. And then when I was sort of recovering from postpartum depression and looking around and realizing how few stories I had to connect to from other people who had had that experience, that was sort of the light bulb moment where I thought, well, here's the book that I need to write, because this is a book that I would have wanted to read when I was going through that experience that, maybe would have helped me feel a little bit less alone in what I was dealing with. So I kind of finally had that click moment of realizing what my first book was going to be about.
Oh, I love that. It's funny because I started the podcast for a very similar reason. I had gone through a breakup and was having a really tough time and thought, oh, if I could listen to someone talk about this experience and relate to what they were going through, I think it would have helped me so much.
Immensely. And, that human connection that stories can provide us is so critical. And I feel like social media kind of gives us a glimpse of it. It's kind of what we want, right? We want that connection, but so much of social media then becomes about comparing ourselves and saying, well, that person's, looks like they're doing great and they're having a wonderful life. And why can't my life look more like that?
Mm-hmm.
I think these deeper conversations are really needed.
I completely agree. And I love that you're writing a book about your experience, and I'm sure it will help so many people. And so you have 2 kids, currently pregnant with your 3rd.
Yes, indeed.
An unexpected COVID baby, but we'll dive into that more later. So when did you know did you experience postpartum depression the worst with your first child?
Actually, it was the worst with my second.
Okay.
With my first child, she I had the easiest pregnancy with her. It was like a textbook. I am meant to do this. I am a bounteous mother goddess. And it was just like this dream. And I thought, oh man, I'm just meant to do this. And then when she was about 5 days old, she got very, very sick, and we ended up living in Children's Hospital for the next month. And she had contracted bacterial sepsis, a blood infection, and she almost died. It was a really horrifying experience. And so I came out of that with, it took me a long time later of talking to a therapist to realize I came out of that with actually some quite severe PTSD.
Wow.
And kind of combined with that really terrible time was the immense struggle that I had with breastfeeding, which I had sort of been led to believe was easy and natural and was going to come to me, very simply. And it just didn't. It was a real struggle for me. And I, again, did not really receive the kind of support that I needed. And through very well-meaning people, lots of really wonderful nurses and lactation consultants who kept telling me, keep going, you can do it, it's so important. But I was living in the hospital with this tiny baby. I was still recovering from what actually ended up being a very difficult labor. So I had quite severe anxiety, mostly after she was born, because I was just so afraid that something was going to happen to her. But she recovered. She's 6 now. She's totally fine. So that was sort of more like situational. Like when I look back at that, it's pretty clear to me that most of what was so hard about that was the extenuating circumstances of her being so sick. So it didn't really get into the serious depression until I was actually during my pregnancy with my second, which was a night and day different from that, glorious, like, oh, I love being pregnant, it's the best thing ever, to, oh my God, I feel like I'm going to fall apart just constantly. I was in so much pain. I had something called symphysis pubis dysfunction, which meant I could barely walk. I got diagnosed with gestational diabetes, which of course you're supposed to manage by exercising and do that. And my daughter was only 18 months old when I got, which I know there's, plenty of people that have kids closer together than that, but I had not really considered what it meant to have a 2-year-old and a newborn at the same time.
Wow. That's crazy. And my brother and I are, I think, almost that same age difference. And my mom did not mean to get pregnant with me as fast as she did. But even what you're talking about with breastfeeding too, and how hard it can be, like, I obviously can't relate to in a personal sense to what you're talking about, but the women in my family have always been very vocal with each other. I feel like even around me, where they've shared their childbirth experiences and they've shared their breastfeeding experiences.
Oh.
And I feel really lucky to kind of have that normalized. And I don't think I don't know if it's common or not, but it's definitely needed, I'm sure, in that process.
I don't think it is common. Just the narratives that I encountered around it. Part of it is the stress that we put on ourselves. And this is one of the things about modern motherhood, is we expect ourselves to measure up to these ridiculous standards. Well, motherhood's probably been like that since way before social media, but anyway. But there's something about not hearing those stories that then when it's a struggle for you, you think, I'm alone in this. There's no one to go to. There's no one to talk to. And there are these wonderful supports. We have these, I met this wonderful lactation consultant who was, one of the kindest, most encouraging humans I've ever met. But every time I asked her for help, she would just sort of take my daughter and kind of like, there you go. And I was like, well, that's great, but what do I do when you're not here?
Yeah.
And just that constant messaging around that you get it in the hospital, you get it from complete strangers. A person approached me in a park one day and asked me why I was giving my daughter a bottle.
Wow.
Nursing her, which is, very inappropriate. And because those conversations aren't normalized, there's this tremendous amount of shame and fear around it. So I think it's amazing that your family has been so open about that, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, I feel really lucky, especially yeah, being the age I am, and I've been really close with my family as I've grown up. My brother and I have both talked about how we want to have kids one day, yeah, as soon as you started talking about breastfeeding, I think my I just know that my mom had a really tough time, and her aunt came over and would do something similar to what it sounded like the lactation woman would do for you, is that they would just like be like, all right, here, you can put the baby there, but I feel like motherhood is such an insane experience to suddenly be found you in to not have a support system. I'm sure is just tremendously difficult.
I like the phrasing that you used there. Yeah, it is sort of a state that you find yourself in, and you don't really consider, because it isn't talked about. You don't really consider the change that it's going to bring to your life. I mean, obviously well, baby's going to be up in the night, and you're going to, your life is going to kind of revolve for a while around changing diapers and feeds and nap time and stuff like that. But there's this moment, where they put this little being on your chest, and you think like, oh crap, like now I have to keep you alive. Like I remember when we were leaving the hospital with Willow, we had her in her car seat, and we literally sat in the parking lot for like 10 minutes because we thought somebody was going to come out and like check to make sure that the car seat was in proper. We were like, are they just going to let us leave? We don't know what to do with this tiny infant. And then you suddenly sort of realize how little you know about looking after something other than yourself. And I'm laughing about it, but there is sort of this shift of, you go from being, I went from being, in an instant, from being Morag to being a mom.
Yeah.
And there was no roadmap for what that meant. So there was a lot of struggle for me to sort of figure out, like, who is this person?
How do I care for them? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do I look after myself and this new being at the same time?
Yeah, that must have been insane as well then, to have a newborn, be pregnant again, and then be experiencing such a tough time trying to navigate all of these things.
Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, she wasn't really little when I was pregnant. I mean, she was a year and a half. And she's very verbal, so she was speaking in full sentences by then. So to me, she seemed very grown up. But I sort of look back on that now, and I think, she was just over 2 when her brother was born. And man, 2 is an intense age. They're all intense, but but 2 is an intense time to be managing a baby and a toddler. She suddenly decided one day she was going to start using the toilet. So then I had to try and figure out how to navigate that, and, being out in public with the 2 of them. And it could feel very overwhelming sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So at what point did you kind of realize you were in a state of postpartum depression and work through that?
Yeah, it took a long time. It took a long time because I think one of the big reasons it took so long was that I had a symptom of postpartum depression that is very rarely talked about, even more so than kind of postpartum mood disorders in general, which is postpartum rage. So postpartum rage is, from what we can tell, is actually very common, but it's really not spoken about. So for example, when you go to your follow-up appointments after the baby's born, you fill out a form. It's the Edinburgh Depression Scale. And it's basically a series of questions, and they give you, it's things like, in the last week, have you been able to laugh and see the funny side of things? And then it gives you 4 kind of options, like yes, a little bit, not really, and not at all kind of thing. So there are those sorts of questions. And they're all 10 of these questions revolve around like sadness, anxiety, and there is no mention anywhere of anger or rage. So I would fill out the form, and I'd get like a very low score, and they'd be like, oh, you're doing really great. And I was like, well, I guess this is something that's not normal. And if it were normal, they would know about it, and they would ask me about it. And since they're not doing that, it's obviously something I need to be ashamed of.
Wow.
And it just never occurred to me that it could be a symptom, because I had never, ever heard that mentioned as a symptom of postpartum depression. And rage, I've been thinking about a lot, is not, rage and anger are not normalized at all, especially for women. It's kind of more acceptable for us to be sad.
That's crazy.
Kind of like a more feminine thing to be sad. Angry women are a trope for a reason. Like, that's where we get sort of the stories of like harpies and like these hysterical, crazy murderesses and stuff. So, anger is really not considered kind of widely appropriate for women. And so it just never occurred to me that that's what was happening. And so I just walked around with this basically like boiling rage all the time. And I had no idea where it had come from. It was not me at all. It never felt anything like it. And I thought, I can't tell anybody about this. This is so painful.
So you lived in it by yourself for a really long time.
I did. Yeah. I was afraid to tell anybody about it because I thought, what kind of person feels that way?
Wow. That's crazy. It's so heartbreaking to hear that you were suffering so long in silence, thinking that what you were going through was something to be ashamed of, that wasn't normal.
Yeah, I was afraid that if I told anybody, that they would take my kids away. I don't really know who I thought was going to do that. It's fairly nebulous, but I just had this very strong, pervasive sense that like I could not tell anybody what I was going through. And of course that doesn't work. So it manifested itself primarily in my marriage, which was very, very difficult, and it put a tremendous strain on our relationship.
So when did you start to vocalize it or seek help or seek support in any way?
I ended up getting into a support group for postpartum moms that was run by a public health nurse and a psychiatrist. And it was an absolute lifesaver, because it was exactly like we were talking about at the beginning. It was normal. It was so normalizing to sit in a room with 10 other people and hear somebody say, this is how I feel right now, and think, oh man, me too. You too? And just that realization of that community existing and that everybody was feeling some version of the same thing was such a huge relief.
Wow, I think it just shows how important community is in our lives.
Absolutely. To come back to where we started, right? Those connections and those stories. We would sit around and talk about what, how whatever anybody was going through, and you would just see everybody nodding, and everyone's circumstance was different, but there was this connective thread between all of us of, this is hard. This is hard work.
I think it's so important wherever you're at in life and what you're going through is to be able to sit with people and all acknowledge that what you're going through is hard. And it's not about a quick fix. It's not about how can we solve each other's problems. It's about sitting and holding space and being like, how you're feeling, I'm with you. Like, I am right by you. And it's totally okay to feel how you're feeling.
Absolutely. And so that group was a huge part of that. And then I also connected with a woman who was my prenatal yoga instructor, who is also a full spectrum doula. And I remember I sat down with her one day and I sort of told her about what I'd been going through. And she just looked at me and said, your anger is valid.
Wow.
Your grief is valid. Your anger is valid. I see you. And it was, like the heavens opened, the sun shone down, the angelic choir sang. Like that's what you need, right? Is you don't need somebody to say, oh, well, I recommend, that we get you on 50 milligrams of Zoloft. I mean, medication is a wonderful tool, and it's something that I use myself, and I think it's really important to normalize that too. But so much of the time you just are looking for someone to say, I hear you, I see you, you're not alone, you're not broken.
100%. Did you notice a shift then in your family dynamic and in your marriage when you started to have this community and this support?
Very much so. It sort of enabled me to stop being trapped inside my own head. So I think a lot of, why it came out in the marriage was because I felt so alone, and I felt like I had to hide everything. And so I felt very resentful towards my husband. And I would sort of go around with this dark cloud thinking like, how come he doesn't, support me in the ways I want to be supported? And as I started to realize, where this anger was coming from, and to be less afraid of it, and to kind of sit with it and try to understand where it was coming from, it allowed me to look sort of past my own experience and look at his experience and think, well, of course he can't support me the way I want to be supported, because I'm not communicating anything to him.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand what's happening, and he's doing his best, to be here for me. And I'm expecting him to read my mind and to understand what it's like inside my head right now, which is ridiculous. So it really helped me to get out of that sort of little box of, I have to keep everything in here and I can't share it with anybody, to being able to turn to him and say like, hey, I know this is affecting you too.
Become a team in that. And I'm sure it changed a lot when you finally got to communicate what you were going through and realizing that it was okay.
Yeah. I mean, who knew, right? Communication. apparently really important.
We're like communication, community, support, holding space.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't think of this before, but
but I think also things become so huge in our heads that we just make things just ginormous, and we're like, this is such a huge thing, I can't even communicate it. And then I feel like once you start to get things out, you're like, oh, this isn't as big of a deal as I thought it was.
Yes. Yeah. You feel really alone when you do that, when you build that sort of castle and think, okay, I got to make a moat to keep everybody out, and I've got these high walls that I can hide behind. And then you're just in there kind of with yourself. And you're kind of pacing those walls and thinking like, okay, I can't let anybody in. And, is that door locked? And have I got those windows shut? And it's very exhausting to sort of be on that high alert all the time.
Yeah.
And then when you can finally sort of open that gate and just say like, man, I'm exhausted. My feet are a different size now. My hair is a totally different texture. Like, I don't know who this person is, but I'd love it if you could come in and maybe help me figure it out.
Yeah.
It's amazing what a difference that makes.
Yeah, 100%. It makes me think about my parents, and my parents have always said, like, we're a team. We're always a team. We're in it together. And that's like, especially, and they've always said too, they say, like, sometimes couples think that to have kids, they're like, oh, that'll solve our problems. And they're like, nope, it only amplifies them times 1,000.
Yep. So you better sort that out before.
Exactly. I'm curious kind of the timeline as well when you started to reach out to these support systems, and like how long you did suffer in it alone before you started to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I think is so frustrating about looking back at my experience, I'm a pretty self-aware person in general, I like to think. I'd done counseling before. I'd been to a therapist before. I'd been to a anxiety specialist before. I sort of considered myself pretty knowledgeable about mental health, and I thought, if I have a problem, I'll know. And I'm not afraid to reach out. And then when I was in it, it was a completely different story, right? Because I was like, well, I don't know where this anger is coming from, but clearly it's bad and wrong. And then when I sort of very gradually kind of started to put out these little feelers of like, there's got to be something out there, somebody out there I can talk to, it was so hard to find anybody. You know, it was, I sort of felt like the focus was very much on the baby, which I totally get. They would sort of ask me like, how did your stitches heal? And I'd be like, well, fine. Okay, then let's talk about the baby. So even knowing kind of, a reasonable amount about mental health, and even having the privilege of being white and, upper class, I still found it so difficult to access the supports because I didn't know where they were. I didn't know who to ask. I did try to get a referral for a psychiatrist at one point, and I was turned down from 10 different practices who all told me, our wait list is so long, we're not even going to bother putting you on it.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I love that you mentioned too, being a white upper class woman, even being in that position where it already kind of gives you a leg up in trying to find support systems and resources, you still couldn't find stuff for a long time. That's just so heartbreaking, and why I care so much about, going into the mental health field, because those resources need to be accessible for everybody.
They absolutely do. And, when I think about how hard that it was for me to access those services as a cis woman in a hetero relationship, and then I know people who are, queer parents and, people of color who have had horrendous experiences trying to access mental health. And so I'm very aware of that privilege. And even with that privilege, that's how difficult it was for me to find those supports. So I think it's mind-boggling that we have an issue on this scale that is just kind of, pushed out of sight.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm also curious kind of how your frame of mind is. It's an interesting double whammy. I feel like you found yourself in, where you're pregnant and you're also writing a memoir about postpartum depression and your experiences, that I'm sure there's a lot of emotions coming up, and how are you navigating, those past feelings that I'm sure I remember you said on Friday in our writing group that you were writing about rage or something along those lines, and you found yourself back in it, and you had to remind yourself like, I'm safe and I'm not in that place anymore.
Yeah, that's been a huge amount of work for me in the last couple of years. I tend to be very sort of, well, my husband would say I'm not logical, but I tend to be very sort of intellectually oriented. I like to think my way through things. Even though I'm very empathic, a very sensitive person, I'm an academic at heart. And so I like lists and cross references and things like that. And it's really been a lot of work for me in the last couple of years to get into just allowing myself to feel things in my body more. And so writing about rage, postpartum rage while being pregnant, it's a really intense experience. And so I kind of have to sit with it and ask myself, because I want to write about it authentically. And so to ask myself to go back there is very humbling. I had to sort of sit with myself and say, am I okay to do this? And that's a big part of what the writing group has been so powerful for me, is, again, that community of being able to write that while knowing that there are people with me, that I can bring up the Zoom screen and I can see everybody's faces and think, okay, it's all right. I'm not alone. I've got these people here. I can talk to them if I need to. But there's a lot of just sort of sitting with it and thinking, like, where did I feel that in my body? When I was experiencing that rage. Well, I remember I would feel it starting in my feet, so I would sort of sit and think about that, and then have to sort of consciously release it again.
Wow.
Because it's that memory lives in our bodies, right? That sense memory and that muscle memory. And so it's very challenging to go back there in an authentic way without sort of feeling kind of sucked under by it, because it is so intense.
I love that you brought up noticing it in your body and releasing that. And I learned so much in like a recent book I read too, that we hold our trauma in our bodies. So, taking it out of your head and into the physical part is something that I don't, it's not easy to do, but it's so necessary in that process for sure.
Yeah. And especially when you're not used to doing it, we don't really live in a culture that kind of encourages that. We are supposed to like talk it out and, think our way through it. But sometimes you also need to feel your way through it and to move your way through it. And so there have been times where I've been writing and I've had to get up and like literally, put on loud music and just kind of shake it out and try and get it out of my body, and that it feels hugely cathartic, but you also kind of have that like, okay, I'm going to close the curtains before I do.
Yeah, I remember, I think one of the first like groups that like the writing classes that I joined, you mentioned, yeah, you were like, if you see me over here flailing my limbs around, you're like, don't mind me.
And that's a big, like, because originally I was like, I'm going to turn my camera off. Right. And then I was like, no, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. And I want to feel comfortable enough, to do that in full view.
Yeah, I love that. I feel so lucky to be able to share that writing space with you every week and sit down and have this conversation more lengthy to dive into, what you're actually experiencing and as you write all of this. And even last Friday, I like ended up listening to music. And for a moment, I did turn my camera off, but I turned it back on and was just like singing and typing. And like it's so powerful and just so heartwarming to like see those faces there and know we're not writing alone.
Exactly. And especially in this incredibly bizarre year of isolation, to have that space of connection and community is, it's one of the highlights of my week.
Yeah, me too. I like, especially now that I've like gotten back into it, I'm like, oh my God, I can't miss a Friday. Like, no matter what mood I go into it with, I always leave feeling exactly how I feel right now, just so warm and supported and heard and seen, and just that community. It's just everything.
Those sharing spaces are really sacred. And it's funny to say that about a Zoom call.
Yeah.
Because there's so many jokes about like, I am actually wearing pants right now, but it's it's a Zoom call, so you don't know what it looks like from your town.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of kind of silliness around that, like that digital space, and there is kind of a remove, obviously, that's not the same as being in a room with somebody. But I really think it's one of the things that's been so interesting about seeking community during this time is it's hard. It's really hard. But we are kind of finding these ways to make it work and to realize how crucial that connection is to our well-being.
100%. Yeah. And it is funny. There's definitely a silliness to it. And there's been so many podcast calls where I wear something like decently nice on the top and then just sweatpants. Like basically every call in the last 3 months, I'm wearing sweatpants on the bottom and a decent top
Hey,
up
at least
here.
put pants on.
It's true. So the last thing I kind of wanted to ask was how you're feeling going into your due date is coming up in February, and how you're feeling about this third child you're about to bring into the world.
That's my COVID baby. So one of the things we sort of touched on briefly was, the weirdness of me writing this book while being pregnant. And actually, when I found out I was pregnant, I stopped writing the book for a while because I thought, well, I can't do this. I can't go into that place, while I'm experiencing another pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point I just decided, no, I think it would be good for me to do that. And so I turned back to the writing, and what an incredible transformative experience to be able to process that and to look back on that person who went through that with compassion, and kindness and forgiveness and understanding, has really deepened this experience of pregnancy for me. It's made it a very, very beautiful, conscious kind of process of just reflecting on being able to enjoy it again, because the last one I was so miserable, and it was so traumatizing in so many ways. And so to be able to go back to seeing the beauty of it and enjoying it. And the kids are older now, they're 4 and 6. So they're not quite as needy. They can entertain themselves a little bit. So I actually feel so lucky. And again, speaking from, as I want to recognize, I'm speaking from a place of enormous privilege, but I actually feel really lucky to be experiencing this pregnancy during a global pandemic. That feels like a really weird thing to say.
But I feel like that's so refreshing to hear and to know that you're enjoying it. And I feel like you've grown and changed so much as a person since your last pregnancy, that experiencing it now and having so much self-reflection that you are having and doing is so powerful and really cool to see.
Thank you. It feels like a gift. It feels like a gift to be able to go back there and sort of forgive myself for a lot of the shame and the guilt that I hold and still hold around, not being good enough, not being a good enough mother, and it's pretty transformative to be able to look back and see that and be able to heal some of those wounds. And writing for me is an incredibly powerful tool for that.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I want to thank you so much for your vulnerability and just warm energy. And I hope people can really take away how important it is to normalize feeling whatever way your body and your mind and your soul is feeling when you go through insane life change, and knowing that it's okay and there's no reason to be ashamed about it. And it's important to seek support.
Absolutely. And it's, reaching out for help is a strength, not a weakness. And as that amazing friend of mine said to me, all of your feelings are valid. You do not need to look on the bright side. You do not need to count your blessings. All of that stuff is really wonderful, but it is so important to acknowledge that however you are feeling, it is valid and it matters, and you're seen.
Mm. Oh, that's such a perfect way to end. Oh, I love it. I need to I'm going to send Dana a thank you message being like, you connected, just she makes such wonderful connections with people. And I'm just so happy she encouraged us to come on and have this conversation. I feel like I learned so much, and I feel so lucky that I'm at such a young age, but being exposed to so many experiences and conversations that one day when I have a family, I know there is support there, and how normalizing all those different things that people experience is
that's why this is important to me. That's why I decided to write the book. So that's really amazing to hear. I'm really glad.
Oh,
and I'm so glad to hear that your family is already so supportive, and it's really wonderful.
Yeah, I find through a lot of these conversations, I'm so grateful for my family, but more and more just the support and the openness that I have had with them for forever. And I owe it to my parents for the team that they have built just with each other and then in our family.
That's amazing.
Oh, okay. So where can people also follow you and find out when your book will eventually be released one day soon?
Yeah. Well, I'm on Instagram. You can check me out there. I'm at Rainy Day Mo. So Rainy Day Mo, M-O, all one word. And I post a lot about parenting there. So whenever the book is coming out, I'll be talking about it there. And I'm also going to be published in an upcoming anthology through the Canadian Perinatal Mental Health Collaborative, which is putting out a book early in 2021, focusing on stories around perinatal mental health. So I'm really excited to be part of that too.
Perfect. I will put the information in the show notes for both of those.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for being here, Morag. I'm so glad we got to sit and have this conversation.
Me too, Jess. Thank you so much for having me. It was awesome.
Of course. And I'll see you on Friday to write. This was such an amazing conversation to have with Morag, and I am so happy she is normalizing how important it is to feel however you're feeling for so many people, especially when going through a pregnancy or postpartum. So check her out at Rainy Day Mo. I'm so excited to finally give her memoir a read when it eventually comes out. She's still in the process of writing it, which is really exciting, especially now that she's got a little new baby. And make sure you follow us on Instagram at Human to Human Pod, because I will of course be posting when her memoir comes out on there, and my Instagram as well at Jessica J. McDonald. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, rate, leave a review, check us out on YouTube, and check out pickmybrain.world. I will see you on Tuesday. Actually, I think there's a bonus episode coming out later this week, so if you're subscribed, you better be subscribed, because then you'll be notified. Love you guys so much.